very simple. It wasn't too technical. It
I mean,
wasn't
we're
too
not done
advanced.
yet, so it's not all easy. Maybe it'll get
But
very
from a
convoluted and very layered pretty soon. But no, I
Yeah,
thought it was
no,
really good.
yeah, it was really good, but and fast, but not so deep as other papers. Like.
Yeah.
But this is, I guess, how it is when you do journal club. Yeah, right? You cannot expect, I guess, that all the papers will be amazing, but sometimes you have them more or less. And
but it's
Yeah.
enjoyable when it's the viscosity is not so high, when it's nice and flows very easily. I think
yeah,
that's enjoyable.
and that's why also as you can see, I always give only like more or less 6 uh, pages or something like that. It will not be a lot of work to read it for next, because all of us are busy with other stuff. So it's always like, just a small piece, and then, it will take more time, but it will be less,
Overwhelming.
yeah,
Yeah.
like for each moment, it will be less
Piece by
painful.
piece.
No, no. I think that the best part that, so yeah, if you didn't read it, no worries, and you can do it for next time, like for the next half, because it's fast. You can actually do it very quickly. I think. Don't worry. It's like you will see. It's really fast reading.
Light.
Light. Yeah, it is light. One really nice thing that I did learn from this part actually was about why consciousness has to be serial and not parallel. So, like in the past, we spoke about it already with Ashok, that is not here today, about the fact that from one hand, our brain is a network, and then it worked in parallel. But then when we go to consciousness, it's like it's very serial. You can like have experience about one thing, then experience about the next thing, and it's very serial. And we were wondering, why is that, And why do we move from this parallel processing into like serial experience or serial processing?
Nir, can you expand on that? Because I was hoping to read something serial versus parallel. Can you explain how you believe is different? The difference? What is is consciousness? How is consciousness or processing or so forth? Perhaps what's the difference in the wiring and the function of the wiring
of consciousness versus the other cognitive abilities, do you mean?
Correct.
Okay, yes. 1 second, let's see what Dina is, she wrote here something. Still curious about how AI might take advantage of multi-thread consciousness. Yeah, good question. But first of all, about, okay. So about this paper and about your question about consciousness. So we start from neurons, let's say, we need to start somewhere. Let's start from neurons. And in this paper, he wrote at some point that seems to be that neurons are serial, right? You get input, and there is some processing, and then it fires. So it's really, and then it will happen again and again, and the neuron needs to rest a bit between one firing train to the other. So it is. So we start from a serial processing, but then because in our brain we have different areas that has different functions and specified, they become special, in a different tasks. Then because of that, all of a sudden we do have parallel processing of, let's say, face recognition in area named fusiform, and also the emotional recognition in a different place called the amygdala, and then more in the frontal, it will combine those together to understand what do we see. And we know that this is the process, by the way, because there are patients that has, let's say, a stroke or something like that. And afterwards, they will see their mother or father, and they will tell you, no, it's not the real mother and father. They are imposters. Or they will see the house when they grew up, and they will say, it looks like the house, but actually it's not the real one, although it is. And then when the scientists try to understand what is going on with them, they understood that the problem is that there is a breakdown in the connection between the amygdala and the, let's say, fusiform, if it's about the faces of the parents. So usually there is, you understand that this is the face of your father, and then you have also from the amygdala the emotional response for your father, and and then it should integrate together. But with them, there is no integration here. There is some breakdown there in the, and that's why. So they recognize the face of their father, let's say, or mother, but without any emotional reaction to that. And then the interpretation is that it is an imposter, right? So okay, so this is like a nice example of how we have a parallel processing. But then with consciousness, it's first of all what it seems like in the phenomenological sense, what we all experience. So I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's something that is very intuitive for us, that our consciousness is not parallel, it's more like serial. I mean, now I speak with you, it will be really hard for me to speak with you, but also to read the paper, right? Because it's really hard for us in consciousness to do something parallel, it's much more serial. Thomas, I think you want to say something, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something I've considered a lot and I've played with. It's possible to ride a bike and to have a conversation. It's possible to drive a car and have a deep conversation and listen to the radio. And there are some people who can stack all kinds of activities in parallel. Like there are some buskers who can play one instrument, tap a drum and do a harpsichord and sing all at once, which are arguably similar but distinctive activities. So my general understanding is things that you're learning that require more conscious concentration tend to be serial, but it's possible to have massively parallel activities which are unconscious whilst your conscious mind is freed up. So that's my general understanding.
Yes, I think you're right. For sure, we can drive and speak with someone, but then, Dina, the discussion is focused on
incredibly brief
serial segments. From what do you mean, Dina?
I'm sorry, I was just trying to recap for Thomas some of the discussion we already had about his comment. I made some of the same comments, Thomas, like specifically on Vinci being able to multitask famously. And it came down to the idea that we're talking about time frames that are so incredibly short that they are not, like what you and I are talking about are not in the same, they're just not in the same time frame. We're talking about incredibly short segments that we would never be conscious of.
Got it.
Yeah, this is also a good. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the time that we need to recognize a face, or to recognize the emotional part, and then the integration, it's like less than 100 milliseconds. And consciousness, we know again from like empirical studies that it takes more time, more like above 100 milliseconds to get to the conscious experience. Yeah,
right.
It takes more.
So you're talking about single-threaded processing with ultra-low latency switching that's imperceptible because it's so fast.
That's true, but also even about the examples that you talked about, even when we think about that, so let's say that I'm driving and I'm speaking with you or something like that. Even then, we can say that we are less conscious of what is going on while we're driving, right? I mean, we will all of a sudden we will reach home, and I will probably will say to you, "Oh my God, we're already home." I mean, because most of the attention and most of my experience will go to the conversation and not, to the driving itself. So, like, we take things that are more that are simple and make them more automated. And usually it will be procedures, like exactly like to drive or to ride a bike, something that by heart to do it, and then you don't need the attention, and then it's like a bit less of conscious than the conversation, for example, that we will do. So even there, maybe you can see how, it tends to be less parallel and more serial in that sense.
Go for it.
Just briefly, and I'll try to share things that are possibly less scientific, but at least interesting from weird things I've done. So I did loads and loads of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which I would regard as half cult, half collation of interesting psychological techniques. So I'm not really a fan of it overall, but there's some very interesting stuff in it. So a related idea is called design human engineering, where you try to use, I actually misunderstood its precepts at first, and then I realized it was related. But essentially you ask, well, what are the phenomena of consciousness that you can apply? And if you use design thinking to use them creatively, what can you do? So for example, if you can go into a trance and hypnotize someone to imagine turning down their stress by visualizing a control panel, then you can imagine a control panel, okay, that has a graphic equalizer for your emotions. Okay, and if you can do that, you can program it to do cool things at specific times, to put yourself into very specific states of consciousness. And one of the ideas of design human engineering was the notion of holographic search engines, where, and again, I don't know if this is true, but I think it is. Apparently there are holographic retrieval systems where there's something like a positive or negative hologram. And if you put a hologram as a filter, and you look at something with the same thing repeated in a sub-pattern, it will only show you what's in the filter. So you only see the parts of the hologram that match the visual filter. And apparently if you use a negative hologram, it takes away those subparts, so you only see everything else. Now, whether or not that's just a metaphor or it's an actual physical reality, I believe that's how holographic retrieval systems work. It's certainly something you can do with your mind. And it's possible to sort massive amounts of information using those types of visual principles in a way that doesn't feel like low latency switching. There we are.
So let me see if I understood correctly. The idea of the holographic, how do you call it?
Retrieval system.
Retrieval system is that we have a filter, and the filter itself is like a hologram or something like that, which means, if I understand correctly, that it's like in a lot of scales. So in every scale, you will see only what the filter, what you filtered, right? What are the...
That's right.
Something like that?
Apparently,
why is the hologram part?
Apparently the US military had holographic photography systems, and they were able to do things like take a massive photo of a landscape holographically, and then put a hologram of a tank that had very specific qualities, and then use that to detect the tanks in the landscape, like a type of visual filter. And then if they inverted the hologram and looked through it, they would only show everything else. Now, I don't know if that's a real thing or if it's just some kind of metaphor, but it's certainly possible to do that with your mind. I know because I've done it with myself, and it's been difficult to undo because I process so much information I think we typically do things in a serial way, but then I was like, wow, I now have to catch up with myself because I crunched too much, and now I've lost my orientation. So
Yeah. Okay, I see. I wonder if it's, I mean, what we do know in the brain that, yeah, we start from massive amount of information, and then we will narrow down how much information we will use. In the terms of what we read, we call it, you start like with something we called natural information, all the data, all the inputs from the outside world, let's say, and this is massive. And then only a small amount will be coded to our mind, and we will, so it's like a lens or something that, we will focus on only like really small amount of natural information and data, and we will work only with that. And then attention will narrow it even further for us. And yeah, and so until we will until we will go to consciousness itself, we will we will, decrease the amount of information in couple of times, let's say. So it's like a funnel, I guess. Funnel? Yeah, it's like a funnel. Right?
I'll give one example, and then I'll let you talk, because obviously I don't want to. I'm so interested in this, I could just reply forever. The one counter argument to what you just said is we are conscious of a subset of the total information, so we're consciously aware of a piece of it, but there's more information that we're not necessarily consciously aware of that's still captured, stored, strategically leverageable. I understand that in forensic hypnosis, you can put people into certain states of consciousness where they can see license plate numbers and read them out. I've done this with people who forgot passwords from old computers. They thought they'd forgotten it, then they could remember it. The most extreme example I've ever heard is apparently someone was hypnotized to go back to the age of 2 and see a notepad on their mum's lap before they knew how to read, and read out a number and later check that it was correct. So I understand that our recall is encoded in ways that we can't necessarily intentionally leverage, and many memory palace techniques are about encoding information so that we have a inner language to access it. But that's not the same as our raw storage faculties, which I think are extreme, and often under leveraged. So there we are. So now I'm going to silence myself.
But Thomas, I just have a quick question. I actually saw on a TV show once, there are medical instruments, perhaps, that allow individuals to, someone with ALS, perhaps, to maybe move a cursor on a computer with, they can't have a mouse or anything. Is that what you're talking about? Like that sort of technology where it allows you?
I'm just giving examples from studying hypnosis for 25 years of certain capabilities of what our storage is versus our conscious recall. So for example, I went for a walk earlier, and if you asked me how many SUVs and how many Ford cars were there on my walk, I couldn't tell you. Like, I just couldn't.
Right.
However, I believe that it's possible, whether or not I can do it is another thing, but it's possible to put people into trances where they could step through that experience with enough focus that they could have eidetic recall. And some people can achieve that using hypnosis in forensic hypnosis.
I see. I've heard that as well. I was talking about the thing before that, by the way, I've heard of that as well.
Yeah. So the thing before that they were about, let me see, I think visual metaphors for holographic retrieval systems. That's different to, as I understand it, if someone can focus in a way that lights up a part of their brain, which is then detected as a UI UX feature. I think that's different.
I see. Okay, very good.
For sure, yeah. We right. Dina, I think it will be better if you will just say what you want. Why do you need to write it in the chat?
I just don't like to interrupt people who are speaking because I have a lot of ideas to insert often, and I just kind of want people to take them in. And I also didn't want to speak for you, Nir, but I think, Thomas, that what you're describing is absolutely true. You know, that we have this vast reservoir of stored data that is accessible through certain techniques that are not normally part of our everyday consciousness. But the idea that, like we discussed last week with Nir, was that you can sort of think of consciousness as this focus, and that there is like one point of focus that perpetually shifts and change at a rapid fire pace. And like in the span of less than half a heartbeat, we could be recovering massive amounts of data. And it may not consciously affect us in that time scale, but anyhow, I'll just leave it at that and let Nir speak for himself.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I wanted to say. But first of all, you know, it's not a lecture. It's just a discussion. Everybody can speak. Don't worry. Don't give me like, yeah, yes, Thomas.
Just one other, again, and I share these because I'm guessing these might come from left field sources versus your ordinary informational sources. So I met a guy in Mexico once, who I believe was ranked 7th in the world in certain martial arts weapons, like nunchucks. So he was like, you know, he was like some very, very serious martial artist. And he was also like a close quarters, you know, protection bodyguard for certain dignitaries. You know, a very impressive guy who's very much into shamanism in his own way. And one of the stories that apparently, again, I can't validate this, but the people who knew him seemed to think that it was true, and apparently there were witnesses, is he was walking along, I think as a bodyguard, and somebody threw a bottle at him from behind him where he couldn't actually see the bottle, like it was behind him in his field of awareness, and he turned around, caught the bottle, and threw it back in the guy's face. You know, even though he didn't apparently have the sensory data. Now, in high-end martial arts or certain types of ninjutsu, there is an idea that you can spread your consciousness across the people around you, network to other people's minds, and use that as a cumulative data point. Okay, and so some people who are very, very empathic or think that they can read each other's minds talk in these types of terms, and there are these notions of like, I know, networked consciousness where my personal awareness is connected to somebody else's. If I change my mood, there's changes with me. And I'm a point of consciousness of 2 points of consciousness. We can merge in a tantra meditation, maybe, where we feel like we're one, and we can separate where we feel like we're discrete. But, you know, so I think that groups of people might be able to have multiple consciousnesses, and then maybe some people can split themselves up into more than one.
Okay, the question is how we try to analyze, to try to understand what is consciousness. And we see that it's connected to the brain, right? Like we see that, you know, you need, let's say, more than 100 milliseconds in order to have consciousness for something. So we try to understand then from the behavior of the brain how consciousness can be created. And in this process, it's really problematic to give a high weight for anecdotes, right? We need to
for sure. I totally accept that, and I don't mean to, you know, I don't mean to frame them as anything other than that, but I still think it's interesting as as an extended test of theory.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a really nice example in actually one of those classes of Ben. Maybe I can find it somewhere, but never mind now, it will take some time. There was this sport news or something in the field. It was baseball, I think. So the interviewer interviewed one of the baseball players. And while they are talking, so they are here, you know, this is one.
Oh yeah, no, he caught it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then right, and then from far away, someone hit the ball, the baseball ball, right? And while talking with her, he just do like that, with his hand, and cut it. It's just amazing to see it, and it's all in the it's all in the video. It was filmed, but of course. Over there, you don't need to assume that there is like multiple consciousness consciousnesses that will emerge somehow. It's just still inputs and also a fast reaction, much faster than consciousness itself, by the way. Right, so if he didn't do the sketching, it wasn't a conscious reaction. First of all, you react, and then it will go to your consciousness. This is something that, again, we know empirically, right? So when we try empirically to understand about consciousness, people talk about access consciousness, which means that in order to have something in consciousness, you need the information to be accessed by most of the brain. Because we see that, I think, no, I didn't show it in my presentation, but when we look in fMRI, for example, between unconscious stimulus and conscious stimulus, let's say you see a word and it flickers. So when it flickers too fast, you see that only small areas of vision saw it. But when it flickers slow enough, and then the person will say, "Yeah, I actually saw it," so you know that there is consciousness. Then you'll see in the brain that lots of areas in the brain will be active, right? So we understand that there is something about consciousness and about the activation of vast areas of the network. That's why we speak about this access of information to vast areas of the network in order to get consciousness. So this is access consciousness. It's not about the interesting stuff of phenomenology and what is qualia.
Sure.
But it still gives us some clues about consciousness, because we understand that there is something important about the access of information, right? And then this also gives us a good explanation of why the consciousness is more is serial, because it takes much more effort, let's say, to get to this point where the information now is being broadcast to all of the brain, and there is this access of information to vast areas of the network. And also, it means that in order to do so, we need, I guess, attention, that will attend to what is important, will broadcast it maybe, and will also do inhibitions for other inputs, right? So there is the input that looks relevant for us, and then, it seems like that attention will do inhibition to all the other inputs. So then only the relevant input will be broadcast anywhere, and we will get this access consciousness, right? So and that's why we need it to be it cannot be parallel, because it's it's so vast, right? And we need so many places at once that will do the same thing, or that will be under inhibition, and so that's why it's like a very hard process that needs to be, much more serial than parallel. This is more or less, I mean, in this paper, they wrote it less about what I said about access consciousness, but more or less it's there. It's in this paper a bit, but not about, not so detailed as I just said. It's
well. Let me be quiet now, and let me hear you guys talk about the paper. Okay, how about that?
I mean, most of us didn't read it. It's fine. But what do you think, all of you, about this explanation? I guess this is what I liked in this paper, by the way. Until now, this was the most, let's say, profound piece of the paper. That it gives a nice explanation of this.
I think what you're describing is really parallel to what Zach was working on, the implementation of this global workspace theory. And for him, it was LIDA, but global workspace theory more broadly, as illustrated by Bars, says that, there is this center of attention that we're calling consciousness. It's, let's say, the spotlight on the stage of your life. And the spotlight will only shine on something once the activity on one part of the stage surpasses a threshold. So you have all of these things competing for your attention, all of these inputs that are actually subconscious parallel processes. All of these are happening. But for any of them to become serial, for it to narrow down from a parallel process to a serial experience, the spotlight, it has to surpass some threshold. It has to enter into, I think Zach would say, the workspace.
Yeah.
Your operational workspace. So yeah, I mean, at one level of analysis, sure, it's serial because we experience our consciousness and our attention from one thing to the next. It's serial by nature, but in many other ways, like you were talking about, it is parallel because especially with subconscious things. I mean, we've learned a lot about this through Ben's class, but we pick up on subconscious cues every moment. I mean, if I place a cold cup into your hand and I continue talking about the same subject, you're going to be naturally more reserved, but you're not going to know why. You're not going to know it's because of the cold cup in your hand. You're going to think that, no, this is just a, part of my conscious thoughts. It's an artifact of who I am. But I think it's like a really nice interplay between whatever this attention thing is and parallel processes competing for the spotlight. I was actually going to ask Nir if you've read Attention Schema Theory by Michael Graciano.
No, but I remember that Zach spoke about it or something like that. I remember this name and I didn't read.
So I'm reading it, I'm working on it right now. And there are a lot of parallels with global workspace theory. I think it's actually it grows off of workspace theory. But I don't know. I just wanted to see if you've read about it because I think it's a really good one to read in our group.
Okay. What is it about actually?
So basically, Michael Graciano talks about how a lot of pieces of our cognition can be done by any machine we devise. So a lot of decision making or a lot of analysis can just be done in a very mechanistic way. But what's the difference between a laptop and a human person? He says, it's consciousness. It's the subjective experience. So his approach isn't to say, where is consciousness coming from? He's saying, how can I explain how a machine would claim to have consciousness? So how can I program a computer to be convinced enough that it's conscious to stand by it firmly and say, no, I'm subjectively conscious. So it's a very interesting, he's not explaining phenomenology per se, but he's explaining why you're convinced that you have phenomenology.
Oh, sounds great. Like a great paper.
Blowing my mind as I'm reading it. It's very, very good.
Raj, can you enter that or a link to it or the title or whatever, how we can access it, please?
Oh, yeah. I'll email it. I'll email it to you guys.
Yeah, let's do exactly. Email it for us. I will add it also to the folder, our folders. And maybe, you know what, after we will, so now we are in the half of this paper. So next week, let's finish that one. But then afterwards, let's read Graciano. I think it's
not long. It's not long. The paper is 6 pages, I think. It's not that intense, but it's it's not very convoluted. He uses very understandable basic language. It's not very dense.
Excellent. So okay. So we will read this one next time, right? I think people will agree with me. It's a good idea to read it next time.
Yes.
After we will finish the.
But based off what you were saying earlier, I mean, I was just saying it relates to global workspace theory because you have all of these subconscious things competing for what we're calling conscious attention.
It's also related. I don't know if you saw my lecture about how I try to solve the hard problem.
Yeah.
About the relativistic point of view. So then this is exactly the point, that if we will have a machine that will firmly say, no, I have consciousness, I feel it, I have qualia, I see red and all this stuff, then you cannot, if you cannot distinguish between, this machine and like a real qualia, it should be the same, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it relates also to that, to this relativistic point of view.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think it's a good idea to read it as well because of that.
Yeah.
So, I just have a question for you. You subscribe to global workspace theory, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think it depends on the paradigm that one, sort of lives in philosophically. If you're an idealist, non-realist, then it will be no problem to believe in psychic phenomena. Or a panpsychist sort of worldview would be no problem. Definitely more physicalist. But it would be actually maybe worthwhile exploring the other side of the coin. There were experiments actually by the CIA done with remote viewing and all kinds of stuff. And it's not taken very seriously in institutions, but, I could find some things if you would like. But,
sure. Until today, I didn't find any good papers of good results about something that is more like,
for instance, von Neumann, that's the consciousness. There's consciousness dependent and conscious observer independent, sort of hypotheses, and they're very tentative. But I can try to find anything empirical if you like. Besides, I'd like to speak with you. I'm going to email you,
Right,
so,
yeah. So do you know what is a philosophical zombie? I mean, I ask all of you, not only Dale or something. Did you hear about this term?
Yeah, that's Chalmers' term, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the term exactly of, Chalmers will say to the paper that Horash told us about, he will say, even if this machine say about itself that it has consciousness, it might be only a zombie, philosophical zombie, that has all the functional parts, but doesn't really have qualia. Doesn't really have the experience itself. Because the qualia, this experience, should be something beyond the functional part. Because all the functional part will do is, again, we will have like a representation of the green, but we will not experience green. Why should we experience green if we only have a representation of green? No? So for Chalmers, it means that, qualia is something that is beyond the functionality, beyond. So even if we have all this access consciousness, all this, zombies, all those machines that will state that they do have something, it's not real. It's not real qualia. It's only philosophical zombie. And I try oh yeah. For us,
well,
right?
Graciano in attention schema theory would challenge that. So he would say that to say that you're conscious, all that means is it's a recursive understanding of your own cognition. So for example, he talks about the body schema, right? So our body schema is our understanding of our physical presence in the world, right?
Okay.
And we operate using this schema. We rely on it pretty heavily, but this schema doesn't actually tell you about the myelin and the actin that makes up your muscles and all the biophysics that's happening. It tells you absolutely nothing about it. So it's a cartoon image of what your body really is. So that's your body schema. Graciano is arguing that there's also an attention schema, which is a cartoon version of all of the processes that are leading to your attention. So, your brain is composed of these billions of neurons interacting in complex ways. Of course, if I ask you how's your attention happening? Of course, you're going to not know what any of that is. Just like you have no idea about all of the biophysics happening in your muscles. But what you will do is say, oh, this is non-physical. I'm having a subjective experience that's separate from the atoms that compose me. In the same way that you'd say in my muscles, like, oh yeah, these are just the muscles that work. I don't like, what do you mean what's underneath that, or what, what's biophysics? Your experience actually tells you nothing about like what makes it up. And he uses that as an argument to say that you're actually mistaken, that you have a subjective experience.
Yeah, this is what Dennett also tried to say, that it's all just an illusion because we don't have all the details. But I don't think but the thing is that it's a good point, but it doesn't really answer of, let's say this is like the negative argument, negative because we have less information. But what about the positive? What about that we do see green, or I do see my body, right? And there is no explanation why representations will actually cause me to experience red or body or something. The positive part, how do you create the experience? This is something that I don't think they answer it very well.
Yeah. So Graciano's theory, at least in my interpretation, is a shell. So it's not actually touching the problem of phenomenology, but it's telling you how you might be convinced that you're conscious. Like, it's kind of saying, like, it's sidestepping it. It's like, well, of course you'd say you're conscious because here's the mechanism, like you think you're conscious. But he goes, to make the positive argument, you're making a non-materialist claim. So that's why I think he's like, well, I'll take the negative argument. I'll show you why you think you're convinced.
Yeah, right.
But,
so
I don't know. I'm not convinced yet. I don't know. But
right. So what I try to do with my relativistic point of view is to give the positive argument as well. That it has we have here a new phenomena, actually, right? And this is the positive. So the green that we will see, is because that this when we are in the system, we will see a new phenomena, actually, a new property that we cannot see from the outside because it's
unique.
We are not, it's we are in a different frame of reference or something. So I try to, it's like complementary. I guess it's complementary. It's like you have this negative argument, and then I try to say, but also this, when you convince that you have consciousness, you really do have consciousness. You really do have a new property.
Yeah, being convinced of it means that you have it.
Yeah, something like that. Right. This, in a sense, this is what I try to do. Relativistic point of view.
I mean, I think in these dialogues, if you're able to ask questions and argue, it sticks a lot better. So I listened to all of the parts of your explanation of the theory, but talking about it definitely helps solidify it. But yeah, I think I understand what you're saying.
Thomas, you have a question?
Yeah, well, just to bring one quick thought, Harash, is that in terms of symbology, there's something called an OODA loop, which is, I guess, a military approach to try to have better orientation than your opponent in terms of the models that they use for orientation. So I always think it's interesting if you compare one person's internal operating model with another to see what functional effect you have, because if there's like a dynamic impact on somebody else's model, then there's some mathematics on both sides that has some functional effect, or there could be at least. A second thing, one of the things I've learned to do is try to ask, well, what are all the possibilities? So, if the idea is that, well, because you believe you're conscious, you are conscious, that's, you could argue that that's like a two-sided binary codification, belief and consciousness. So maybe all the possibilities are, I believe I'm conscious, therefore I'm conscious. I don't believe I'm conscious, therefore I'm conscious, right? I believe I'm conscious, therefore I'm not conscious. I don't believe I'm conscious, therefore I'm not conscious. And each of those is a different philosophical position. And arguably, they're all the possibilities of that finite set. So I find it useful to try to put my mind through those types of perspectives, because then there aren't any more perspectives from those two things as they relate to one another. At least at a binary level, if you make it analog, it's different again.
I think I get what you're saying. Like, each of those different combinations is a new philosophical take on the problem, right? But
therefore, to explore the full map, you need to go, well, what are all the possibilities? And you need to try to use a bit of everything. And then if you're able to do all of that, that tells you something about the subset.
Yeah, I guess it's a good idea in order to open our mind just to think about all these possibilities and what does it mean philosophically, right? To give some arguments and, to develop our mind like that.
I don't believe I'm conscious, therefore I'm not conscious. That's the one I'm taking.
But then how do you believe?
No, I don't believe. I said I don't.
Yeah, it's like I believe that I'm not conscious, I guess it will be... Can you say I don't believe I'm not conscious? I think it should be more like I believe I'm not conscious. You do have the belief that you're not conscious, right?
I mean, if you see people at music festivals who've taken too much ketamine, sometimes they go, do I exist? Am I real?
It tends to happen in engaging very heavy in epistemology and in philosophy, which is outside of the realm, I think, of near, this in some ways is very heavy philosophy, this journal club. But, of course, you are more in the hard sciences and the mathematics. So it's very interesting. But solipsism is central to every conversation that we should be having.
Well,
holistic,
Yeah, but solipsism is like, there's nothing you can do with it. If you say, well, I cannot prove that anything exists outside of me, and okay, that's it. Like, okay,
bye.
Like, yeah, exactly. We finished the argument. It's like you're stuck if you go there.
Certainly, it's more recursive, but it's more philosophical, maybe only purely, whereas your specialty in concentration is within the realm of,
Yeah, I think, that philosophy is great. I really like philosophy, as you can see, right? But also physics or science gives you the answers. Like philosophy, really good to give you good arguments and questions and ways to think about stuff. But then it's not enough. I think that science actually gives us real answers. And that's why I'm like in between. Like I try to take from both worlds, and that's why at some point you need to have a model. You need to create a model that it's more than just the philosophical idea, but actually, like a concrete model that you can predict what will happen.
How long have you had your model for?
It depends which one, which model we are talking about. Because this really. So, I mean, I have the functional side with all the strange attractors and chaos that, Thomas, sorry, you don't know about it. I didn't speak about it, in our lecture, but we did speak about it here. That I have like, a whole theory that I try to do now. I hope to start my postdoc about it, how to explain the functional side, how the brain works, how it can create all those schemas and everything. And this, started like 20 years ago even, but then it was really more philosophical. And, and then gradually I can build it to be more and more scientific and physical, with mathematics and everything. The relativistic point of view, I mean, I had this a long time ago, but it was really only some essence of it, but it wasn't developed good enough. Only now, after I took a couple of classes about cognitive science and we read all those papers, it all, connected together. It was really great how, you know how sometimes things just connect, like you have lots of ideas and it's all, connect to something new. So this is more or less happened like in this couple of months. So it depends, yeah. And maybe, I guess it's still not ready. So, we need to develop it more. And that's why it's really fun to discuss it, because then it's like brainstorming and I can see how, is it good enough or not? And what should I think about more, and arguments, is it good or bad? So, yeah.
I'd just like to shine a light on the impulse to find certainty. And how that is, that's obviously a key driver in shared codified consciousness, but necessarily, if you can relax that impulse, and you can go, well, maybe I don't know, maybe my model can't work, maybe I'm uncertain, you also get another interesting type of data, because I think many humans search for certainty, but it's in the uncertainty that we can see more things.
That's true. I don't know exactly how, I don't know how to take it for consciousness, but in general, Dina and me just talked about it last week before the lecture, how, it seems that reality is infinite, right? We don't really know what is going on here, and we try to dig and to understand. And that's why I like this cave analogy of Plato, how we all see just the cave, not the real reality. And we start to go out. With me, it's with philosophy and science together. But then you're right that like, if we want to understand the truth, like reality, then always we need to embrace uncertainty, right? Because what we know is only small amount, or only like the cave that we are in. And we want to know what is outside. So we always look at the unknown, which also means to look to the uncertainty part, and then we can try to expand and discover. I think it resembles what you meant. So yeah, I believe that this is the case also in physics. And one thing is that I like physics so much because it's so weird, because I feel it's exactly what we are doing there, in physics. You always look outside to the, to the unknown questions, and physics, they don't afraid to be more and more abstract and weird, to take it exactly outside of the cave more and more. So I really, yeah. You know what? I will say even more than that. It's a bit frustrated that consciousness will be just, relativistic and more, functional side, and not something so bizarre, I like it when it's more bizarre, but I think this is, this is where the path takes me, this is like, it sounds like this is a good answer, and we don't need more than that. So, yeah.
I would philosophically argue that the paving of certainty in your exploration of this area forms a lens through which you see things with certainty. And if that happens functionally, then necessarily it's a lens that codifies the universe through, good principles. But necessarily, you're still using a lens to achieve certainty. Because if you hadn't studied all these things, or if it was 100 years ago, or if there wasn't this information available, or it was 300 years in the future, you couldn't arrive at these same ideas. It would be functionally impossible, right? Therefore, this is a present frontier perspective.
Right.
And seeing it as more than that is problematic, because it's overestimating what you can know.
Okay, and what does it mean? I just want to see if I understood you correctly.
What I mean is, if you can detach yourself from your compulsion to be certain, and a bit, call it egoless, or if you just mess with your own head enough, you can kind of get there. Or if you try to stretch your awareness into things that don't fit conventional models, and you play with your imagination enough to get there, then then you realize consciousness is flexible. So I just wanted to give the example that it would be, if we brought you back 100 years, it wouldn't be possible for you to arrive at these same ideas, because they are a aggregated lens of all of your combined conclusions, which bring you to your present perspective. Okay. If we transported you another 100 years into the future, the same thing is true. There'd be other information and data where this present perspective wouldn't be so. So this is like a frontier of conscious conclusion, according to your personal journey, according to your brain hardware, according to your soul, if that's a thing, all of this stuff. But necessarily, it's useful to classify it as such, so not to get confused that your certainty is the thing, as opposed to a description of what presently makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yes. But will you also agree that we have accumulate more and more knowledge about reality through the scientific process? So, as you said, 100 years ago, maybe we will not have the ability to discuss ideas that we can discuss today, because we didn't have accumulate more information and realizations about what is reality. But still, it's like, once again, it's just like a steps. Will you agree that it's like a steps that we...
I'm going to say accumulate is a problematic phrase, because there's too many papers for you to read personally, and you don't know what's been deleted, and you don't know what's been distorted. So I asked this very senior international lawyer once, who had the weirdest interest, to give me a tip, something I'd never have thought of, because she just seemed very clever in weird ways, and I like asking people for ideas. Okay, so she said, okay, well, if you have time, do this. Get the Encyclopedia Britannica, right, an up-to-date published version, which represents kind of like the frontiers of agreed-upon knowledge by ranking experts with good methodology, okay? And then get the Encyclopedia Britannica going back 100 years, okay, which was an outdated version. And notice how much great stuff has been deleted and how many things are just really brilliant that are no longer there. So I think as we go through time, we edit, curate, conclude, culturally decide upon, socially agree. There's all this distortion, call it relative to what I'll describe as inherent truth. So accumulate suggests that it's simply a matter of adding. And I would say it's more like pruning. It's more like going on an adventure where you get more wisdom, but you leave behind some, right? So we are not sitting at the forefront of all the best known insights. I don't think that we are. I think we're sitting at the forefront of the stuff we've been able to carry forwards and make accessible to us, limited by all the forces that make that so. For example, and apparently from one dynasty to the next in China, they would often destroy key books, such that the Russian libraries had information about their culture that they didn't have in their society, as a style of thought control. Mm-hmm. So, but that happens culturally, that happens socially. We're certainly not, at a pure frontier of the best of all human knowledge known so far. By all accounts, the Vatican has libraries of things that the rest of the world doesn't know. There's all kinds of stuff like that. So I think we're further ahead, but it's fuzzy. It's far from precise. That's my personal view.
I'd challenge that for sure, because I think socially you're absolutely right, and as far as history goes, I think you're spot on. But for a lot of these sciences, it's inherently cumulative. So if I'm studying genomics right now, I don't need to doubt the germ theory of disease, or I don't need to. If I'm studying the brain, I don't need to question the neuron doctrine that actually the connective system is made up of smaller constituent pieces and not one net. Because it builds in that way, I can't really prune or forget about germ theory. Or if I'm studying disease, I can't prune genomics out and forget about it because it's inherently cumulative. So I think it might be a little different, but in some ways I think you're right too.
Yeah, I write with
Yeah.
Rush. That's why we started the scientific method, in order to have a method how to actually discover something about the truth, how to discover things that they are real, you know, and 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 then in this method we understood that we need to have all the information, and we cannot, we need to do this in a cumulative fashion. Uh, so so this scientific method is exactly to try to do it, as Horai said, accumulative, and you don't just dismiss something unless you prove that it's wrong. I mean, I can think about in the early 20th century, they had two different ideas or theories about the universe, the origin of the universe. One would say the universe was always there. It's like infinite and also infinite in time, you know, like and then it will not change. It will never change, or something like that. And the other one would say, no, it's dynamic. It started from a point, you know, and we didn't, you know, and it was still more philosophy than science. But then, after we had enough proofs and we had relativity theory, we saw that actually one theory is correct, the one that, you know, the universe is dynamic, changes, started from a point, and then we dismiss the other theory. Still we know about it, but we dismiss it. You know, we like say, yeah, it doesn't look like a good theory because it doesn't explain all the empirical data and doesn't go well with all the theories that we do have today, right? So we have here a process of accumulating data according to, you know, the empirical, and this is what gives us the hope that we do really climb in the stairs of understanding what is reality, you know, that we do go to, you know, to the direction of the truth, let's say.
And Nir, I think there's some truth in what Thomas is saying, but I think of it this way, you know, because there are absolutely non-scientific interventions on which theories and information are jettisoned from time to time. You know, you can look at all the scientists who had to flee Nazi Germany, for example, or, you know, all the, you know, there are many political forces that will stomp on science or any idea for power reasons unrelated to truth. But Thomas, I do think that there's an overall like evolutionary forward momentum, which probably over time jettisons those ideas which are less useful and which are like, you can look at the human family tree going backward, and there are lineages that for a time were fruitful and then just sort of petered out and no longer are part of what's happening. And I think it's the same idea of the knowledge stream, although I do hear what you're saying, and there, you know, some very valuable things are probably cast aside, but I'm ever an optimist, and like I see those being sometimes, and they are sometimes rediscovered and reintegrated. And like still to this day, some of our most basic questions, even here in the consciousness discussion, those were ideas that the Greeks had or earlier civilizations had and are now reemerging as being valuable, you know. So anyhow, that's my 2 cents.
I think this was a great conversation, everyone. I may have to leave pretty soon. I want to thank you all for your time. But I suppose I just have a few last questions, final questions. I'd like to know to Thomas, what theory of consciousness do you subscribe to? And then the final question I can just pose to everyone is, do you think when a theory of quantum gravity comes, I mean, surely this won't be the end, you know, when you look at dictionaries, we can see this in culture. You know, today we have like woke culture and so forth. And we sort of see this progression of an evolution of how, you know, knowledge is gained. And we see how knowledge is added into, sort of Oxford dictionaries and so forth. But I guess the final question is, when we get to this theory of everything, mathematical or otherwise, do you think we'll be able to dismiss anything and everything else that's not falsifiable from Popper's point of view, for instance? Do you think we'll ever get to that point where we have this theory of quantum gravity? Because there's some quantum gravity, which is the cream of the crop. It's the proverbial gold medal that poses the hard problem of consciousness. That will allow us to solve the, what I think is a runner-up to that problem, because it's going to allow us to see what the final interpretation of QM is. So I guess I'll leave you guys with that. I may need to leave soon, but I always enjoy these conversations, and I'll text you near soon and probably call you later.
Yeah, Dale and I thought maybe to try to write something, a paper about this relativistic point of view, and everything. Yeah, we will speak about it. But yeah, Thomas, I would also like to know what is your perspective about consciousness? Which theory do you...
So I don't really fall in line with any theory. I'd consider myself to be an adventurous, possibly risky consciousness hacker who's tried all kinds of strange things over the years that probably don't fit into most ordinary modes. I've had, I started off with good academic accomplishments, where I believed in my own ability to concentrate and focus. And then I totally melted my head studying hypnosis, and I had to find other ways to remedy that. And then I met all kinds of characters along the way who had very strange backgrounds, anything from in aspects of meditation or weird pieces of the occult. And I basically had to try to search for stuff that would work for me relative to the state of mind I was in at the time. And just went through all kinds of learning experiences where I agreed and disagreed with myself. And that, so even though it's anecdotal, and I accept that for what it is, and I appreciate the nature of the scientific method, I feel like some of my personal experiences shine lights on principles that are anecdotally validated, limits understood. Okay, so I don't try to overestimate them other than to preserve them as data points that I can still contemplate, okay? Mm-hmm. So for example, I've done, you're talking about consciousness with computers, and I'm asking the question, what's the architecture through which you're appraising this? How are you using your consciousness to measure this? Okay, because if you look in different traditions, there are different approaches. So there's an area called radionics, right? Which is the notion that you can use a machine to transmit energy. And then there's something called, I guess, computer-based radionics, where if you can, if someone can, take a crystal, program it with an intention, with the notion that this crystal can transmit positive energy, you can connect it to the sun, it can bless you constantly. Or the opposite is, affect a relationship for better or worse, as people who believe in magic believe. Then some would say, well, maybe you can just program a computer to pray for you 100,000 times a minute and to just keep doing mantras on your behalf. And maybe that changes the aura of the computer. And maybe if you're not using your third eye to see this, you're missing whole layers of the truth. And weirdly, I've seen people who believe in different layers of consciousness where they would go, oh, that's, what's happening here. So I once set up a radionics machine. I sent it, so it was constantly transmitting to a crystal. I walked around an alternative healing fair and I gave it to some guy who had a crystal shop, right? And he's like, what on earth is going on with this? Like, this is the weird, can I hold this for a while? And he found that weird. Now, I didn't tell him what I'd done. There were no social cues. And he got some kind of reaction. Now, is it possible that was in the overlap of our consciousness? It is. Could it be some other mechanism? Maybe. And the reality is we don't know. And if I was too hedged into a belief system about the mechanisms of action, then I couldn't participate in this conversation because I just keep bringing superstition to the science. Okay, but I try and suspend my ideas of what truth is and what I'm certain about in order to check the outlier edge cases and build my own models. And then sometimes try to test things that are really strange to see what happens. And I'm fascinated by some of the types of feedback mechanisms I get. And I don't know, are these part of collective consciousness that you interact with? Or are they just my imagination? But I'm always interested when I do something and someone who I haven't told what I've done seems to experience it from me. I can't tell, is that me programming myself, or is it just a coincidence that I'm building meaning from? You know, I try not to be too attached to my own meanings. But I would consider myself to be a consciousness hacker who never entirely accepts any precept, but tries to scan wide to build novel models because it's interesting. And I find science is grounding, but I also find science is very myopic. It feels like it's
myopic. What is myopic?
Like when you only see a piece of a
yes.
bigger picture. And it also feels like a lot of science is so certainty based. The very nature of exclusion might be the same as only listening to a range of frequencies that other humans do differently. So I don't actually have my mind made up. I more like have like a load of floating possibilities, and I feel like I can use them interchangeably without one unifying model. But there's a maths to that piece that is at least interesting.
It's almost like a field of consciousness. If you have a Facebook or email, you can just send it to me. So,
sure.
Yeah, actually, now we are friends in Facebook with Thomas. I hear you. I can hear you, Thomas. I understand what you're saying. It's just I guess it's you need to have some balance and some like. How to say
open-minded
what? Open-mindedness, of course. You need to have open-mindedness and some I forgot the word, just a second. צניעות. אתוש, צניעות באנגלית? איך אומרים צניעות? Modesty. Yes. You need to have some modesty. You see, it's so hard for me even to say this one.
Yeah, maze modesty. What do you say?
צניעות in Hebrew.
צניעות, so like sorry.
No, סליחה, no.
Maybe it's telling that I never knew that word in Hebrew.
To be צנוע in Hebrew is like to be modest, not to take yourself too seriously, to know that you might be wrong.
Humble.
Humble. Yeah, humble. Okay, humble is better than modest. You're right. Sorry, yeah. The language barrier. Yeah, humble. You know what?
It's the first time I've asked you that I've heard you go for like a Hebrew English dictionary sort of. So a lot of
yes.
You asked your wife?
Yeah, I asked my wife, but on this process, my unconscious already, the word jumped, to my consciousness. Oh yeah, although humble is much better than modesty, right?
But in Ivrit, it's better as modest.
What?
In Ivrit, it's better as modest because it has a really different meaning in Hebrew than it does in English.
So you tell me for a second, what is the difference between modest and humble? And then I will tell you in Hebrew what...
Here's the way I think of it, Nir. Like in English, modesty usually has something to do with like your personal decorum and the way you're attired. You don't want to attract attention to yourself, especially in the sexual arena. Modesty can mean that you clothe yourself. Yes. In Hebrew, it has a very different meaning because it's about a relationship with the divine.
Yeah.
Right? It's right. To know your size in relationship to the divine. That's really
right.
What it means. So I think in the Hebrew meaning of the word, it's actually really more accurate, but we're splitting hairs here, and let's get back to what
Yeah, sure. I mean, it seems that in Hebrew, the same word, tzniut, is also modesty and humble together. In English, it's separated. But then humble. So you need to be humble and to remember that maybe, of course, that, what we know today, it's of course not everything, and maybe it will change, and maybe science only see a narrow part of reality. But then on the other hand, it works very good. It works very well. We with science, we do understand much more insights about nature and reality than we did before.
Yeah. So I mostly agree with the question about taste. Like it does seem that we have more insight, yet unless we avert climate change, we cook ourselves within a decade. As in, we can't say that we're acting with greater intelligence overall. So our intelligence index doesn't seem to be going up, even if
let's say that morality is something different, or to think how to survive and moral and stuff like that. It's a different question than seeking the truth. Like science is about the truth, and other things it's hard for us, let's say, unfortunately.
Yeah, but there's things like.
Nir, I'm going to take contradiction to what you just said. Actually, I think science is not about the truth. It's about practicality. It's about how we can manipulate what we call the material world. I think that's what it's really about. And that stuff is testable. But as far as I can see, we're assembling theories of existence. And science is really good at certain elements of that. I really don't think it's truth. And every time that we have a new paradigm shift, those truths change, and it's true that they usually expand, but still, I have a problem with that idea that science is unfolding truth.
So wait, I have to answer that. I have to answer Dina now. When we do science is not just for practical uses or technologies or how to manipulate matter. We actually do it in order to understand nature. When Newton tried to do mechanics, it wasn't to manipulate nature. It was to understand the divine laws. For Newton, he believed in God, so he thought, it's like the divine laws of reality. Or when Einstein saw that there is a contradiction between mechanics and electromagnetism, he didn't, it wasn't because of technology, right? It was because there is a contradiction about our understanding of the truth, of what is going on here. What are the laws? And the assumption that we should have, it should be like something unified and beautiful, right? And so if we have contradiction, it means that we don't understand something, and we need to understand again what is going on here. So it always, especially with the most brilliant scientists, that it's about to understand reality, not about practicality. Not about just to manipulate matter. This is not the issue.
Understanding reality is a very practical thing. That's what I'm saying. And when you enter the term truth, it's just problematic. Our circle of truth, 500 years ago, by today's standards looks false. Okay. Even, the science, what we know is so little today that I just find it extremely problematic to call it truth. I'm sorry.
Working picture is the idea. I mean, I don't know if any scientist would claim absolute truth for any theory, even the really well-supported ones. So, what scientists would say the theory of evolution is the truth about the universe? I don't think they would use that kind of language. I think it would be in our working image of what we understand as the world around us. This is our best guess.
It's our best guess, and it's a very creative tool that sits in our hands, how I see it, and that's different than truth.
Well, but actually, every scientist, I mean, let's say that knows, that about evolution, that let's say that in their that investigate evolution or biology will tell you that most likely evolution will it's something that is so that from the one hand so profound in the theoretical point of view and philosophical point of view, and also so profound in the proofs that we have, like the, proof, I mean, like all the, empirical side, right? That it will not go away. We might change it over time a bit, but it's not something that all of a sudden we will understand that we were completely wrong. That's why this is what I meant by the cumulative part of science, or the to step out of the cave. That we still step out of the cave, right? That's why I meant like a truth, that it's still part of the way. It's not like that we will go out and go back again and we'll understand that it's not good, and we'll, like I do see here a path that takes us, out to infinity, let's say,
Yeah,
quite
I'd like to.
The truth, the epistemology. Are we ever going to get to it? Whatever objective reality is, we don't know. But that is that's the purpose of, you're right, science and the scientific method, to get as close as you possibly can approach.
Yeah, for sure. Nested bubbles, or what we just said. Yeah, maybe we will never see like the ultimate truth, or like if it's really infinite, we cannot really experience infinite, right? But we, asymptotically, we can reach to it, or we can try to do it, and then it's good enough for me, I think.
Our hardware will only allow us, hardware in our apparatus or brain will only allow us to get so close. From a philosophical point of view.
Right, although, at some point, maybe we can use technology to expand our reality, right? And what we can see. Dina liked it.
It's also worth just contextualizing what we're witnessing with culture and setting that against I'm going to say there's a potential accumulation of science, but it's politically controlled. Obviously, knowledge and power are closely aligned if you can leverage it. Meanwhile, in our world, apparently, if you went back 20 years ago, most 10-year-olds would be able to identify 10 trees in their local area, whereas now they can't because they're glued to their phones. They might be able to identify 10 brands. So we have to be mindful that we live in a post-truth society where technology is used for indoctrination. Our ability to influence one another is at an all-time high. And that creates a weird cult-like, fractionation of phenomena. And in social systems, it seems that if you are too uncertain, then you might not attribute what you know enough power to offset what other people know, because you'll think that they have more authority. And I think, like, for example, someone who's taken a lot of cocaine can feel so certain about what they think is true that to the uninitiated, they might go, oh, that person really knows something, because if I felt that certain, I'd only act that way if I really knew something. But a lot of people can just hack that mechanism for social power. And so unless you start to filter the information propagated through pathologies, permutations of neurochemistry, culture, motivation, why they're doing it, some people will manipulate because of addiction or fetishes or any number of things that will propel them forwards. If you can factor all that context in, then maybe you can extract bits of truth. But if you miss the context wrapping all the knowledge that we think we have, like for example, any experiments now, there's a certain concentration of carbon in our atmosphere that might become a limiting factor relative to things we can test in the fresh air, for example. So going forwards, we might not be able to go, well, what happens to our consciousness at 200 parts per million versus 400? Maybe that has an effect, or maybe not, or maybe all of the nutrients we have changes our ability to use other faculties in our brains, or we just don't know. So we just have to say, well, if we factor the limits of the context through which we've inputted the information and the culture that we've inputted it through, at least we don't take it too seriously. And that's why I'd say accumulated-ish is a good way of thinking.
Okay.
But accumulated is a different thing. We have to be very careful with the language that we use, because our language is like a RISC, reduced instruction set computing mechanism. That's our short circuit of how we bounce around the concepts that we've internalized. So if we're not very careful with the language we choose, then that by itself is our short circuit, shorthand for the things we think we know, and our linguistics will confuse us.
What a fantastic irony anyway, like you said, culturally and from sociologically, it's kind of inverted. Like in feudalism, we had so many people that didn't have access to, literature and the means to communicate, or at least the means to read and write. And now, individuals will definitely use that against political powers. And we can kind of see this really strange inverse from many hundreds of years. And it's very interesting to watch.
Yeah.
But is that, sorry.
Yeah. Thomas, yeah, I can speak.
I was just going to say, is that true, or is that just your brain's way of projecting interpretation from inputted literature? So I think that if you go back, I talked to a friend of mine about this, and if you went back, say, 600 or 700 years in Ireland, then the country was covered in trees. Accents from one area to another were very different. So it would be very unlikely for someone to travel more than, say, 10 or 20 kilometers from their home ever in their whole life. And even if they did, they might not be able to communicate with anyone else because the way they spoke would be so different, it wouldn't work functionally. Now, if you look at any dramatized Hollywood production of such things, we see something entirely different that fills our minds with these concepts. We mistake the movies for the truth. We get very confused by the things we've inputted versus the reality that's probably there. And that's still just my hallucination with a slightly different interpretation, because I can't validate it firsthand. I can only generalize based on what I think is probably real, and hopefully by me striving to be accurate.
We can get, with correlation, surely with the records, we can get somewhat close to some sort of truth. You're right. Well, we're never going to know, what it's like to be 600 years in Spain or something along those lines. We wouldn't be able to communicate and so forth, even if we could somehow bypass all the laws of physics with all the, every paradox that there is. But you're right. Realistically, it wouldn't be tenable. But we can only go by the conversations which have been translated and so forth.
And translations themselves are problematic.
Okay, let me take us back to consciousness a bit. I mean, yeah, I think you're right that we have lots of problems with society today, and how we can do much better work with the culture, and we have lots of work to do if we want to survive just because of the environment, and also if we want to just develop to do a better culture that humans will be, first of all, more compassionate about each other, but also more to know about that there is something bigger than we can try to do than just to go to malls and buy stuff, right? I would like people to know about this infinity, to know about this sublime that we can see in reality. I think we need in society this kind of like a compass, not campus, compass. Wait,
Compass?
campus. Yeah, to show what north is, right? So this is like a bit of like where north is, that there is something bigger that we can do, that we have much more potential than what we think, that nature is much bigger than what we think, and but we cannot do everything at once, right? I mean, for that, I have something different that I call it secular spirituality, for example. It's like a group that I did in Israel, and, we try to do it, for example. But it's different than the question of seeking, this infinite. What is it, and to understand knowledge about it, and that's why I said to understand the truth, but maybe, it's a bigger, it's a bit of, too big of a word, but I hope you understand what I mean. So for that we need science, and then we need to take responsibility at some point. in order, if we want actually to go out of the cave to understand, to expand our understanding, we need to take this responsibility of try to take, to solve, we try to solve something. We try to actually understand and do a theory about something. And because the good method that we have now is science, then okay, then it seems that we need to create a theory and to try to check it, to validate it with experiments, and this is how, this is the way that we know now how to get closer to infinity, how to have more knowledge, So yeah, my point was that at some point we need to say, okay, we know that maybe we are wrong. Maybe there are lots of paths, but according to what I know until today, I think that this path will be a good path for answering what is consciousness. Let's try it and see what will happen, This is, I think, a responsibility that we need to take. Because otherwise it's just, it's a lot of fun just to try lots of paths, but you need to choose at some point, because if we will not choose, we will not know what is right and what is wrong. Okay, again, it's really, I know that the words that I'm using are a bit too much, right and wrong. It's like really, so sorry about that. But I hope don't take the words too much seriously, but I hope that you can understand what I'm trying to say,
Yeah,
Yeah,
like you can't have like epistemological skepticism for every thought you ever have. Like you can't, for example, like right now in speaking, I can't wonder if I'm existing in a solipsistic world or not, and questioning whether I even exist at every moment. I mean, at some point, like pragmatically, you have to make some assumptions. Like maybe this scientific image we have so far, well, maybe it's close to accurate. Let me assume it so that I can ask more questions, or I can build a better understanding or paint a clearer picture. But yeah, Nir, I think I'm with you. Like you have to make some tentative assumptions at some point, or else you can't ever say anything about anything.
I agree. And Raj, I think the way you just phrased it is a very healthy stance.
Very well.
I said the way that he phrased it is a very healthy stance, because it leaves open the possibility that this is one path that we have chosen because it has been fruitful for us. It's been productive, but it keeps the mind open that like there are many other possibilities as well. So we take this path because it seems fruitful, it seems creative, it seems to service our needs and our desires, our dreams, whatever. But I never forget, while I have one foot in that world, I never forget that actually the only thing I know is that I seem to think and I seem to assume that therefore I am. Like this is honestly the only thing I know.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you you can't always be in that one mindset, because or else you wouldn't ever move from your spot. Like,
but for me,
it's not fun.
But for me, it's extremely important to keep a foot in that world and always know that I don't know. Because the minute you take your foot out of that world, you've entered indoctrination and you've limited your mind. And Nir, I know you believe that anyhow. Like I know that's how you are. Like you have your foot in 5 worlds at all times because you understand we know very little right now. So
I just said it because as an introduction to the next sentence, that's why we chose on this journal club to actually read the papers, from a very, you can say, narrow scientific point of view that try to understand what is the mind and what is consciousness through the, through all the knowledge that we accumulate until today and, of cognitive science and neuroscience, right? And experimental, of course, data. Just because, as you said, it works. It gives us more and more knowledge and understanding about what is going on here and what is, the reality of consciousness. So,
Yeah, I just think ultimately it's really important to always understand that science is a tool that sits in our hand and that is very useful, beautiful. It's even pragmatic in ways that give us pleasure and excitement, but never forget it's a tool.
Oh, you remind me a great quote of Feynman, Richard Feynman, the physicist. So he said something that you don't do physics because just for, because it's pragmatic and just because
Because
it's
if physics is like sex, one, we don't do it because we. Oh, I just posted.
yeah. Yeah, physics it is
Agree.
like sex. You don't do it just for the outcome of it. You do it because it's fun.
I agree, and Feynman can sit on my knee.
I'm not sure I understand this sentence.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that either, Dina, but I think I'm
Yeah.
happy for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Catch your drift.
I mean, if you would like to, okay, you can sit it at my knee as well.
Yeah.
Well, me too.
I will give him that.
It's just a power play with gender and sexual roles. I'm saying Feynman, that sexy motherfucker, can sit on my lap any day. With an idea like that, sure, little fella, come sit on my knee.
Yes.
It might be, I mean, he may have sat on someone's knee who learned things from him that the rest of us didn't get to see through the culture that we know. So, and maybe that is the key to the divine, actually, Dina.
To sit on the knee.
Well, for Dina to get Feynman to sit on her knee.
Right. All right. Let's maybe finish for today and continue next time, next week. Dale, you found the quote. Physics is like sex. Sure, it may give some practical results, but that's not why we do it. Okay, so this is the actual quote. Yeah.
It's wonderful to meet with all of you again. Hopefully, we do it again next week. Hope.
Yes. So we're going to finish up that paper, right? We're going to do the second half.
Exactly. And then we'll go.
And I'll operate in a more scientific way next week, as opposed to just drawing on everything else.
No, I mean, I really enjoyed the conversation. It was fun. But just,
hopefully I didn't make you less scientific.
It was lots of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Philosophy of science.
Philosophy of science, yeah.
I'll send that attention schema paper over too.
Great. I will edit, and then in 2 weeks we will read this paper. Now, something completely different for Rush. I just wanted to ask, where are you right now? I see this board for those equations.
Yeah. Okay. I'm no longer